Today, we're going to be talking about the differences that I see working with businesses that are either starting, businesses that are expanding, or established businesses that are reimagining what their future is. Because there's a lot of lessons in terms of how decisions are actually being made to move projects forward, depending on which phase of the life cycle you're in. We're going to be going over common themes, key differences, as well as examples and tactics that I see that are useful for making decisions at each phase of this process. Over the years, I've noticed that there are key differences between businesses that are both starting, businesses that are expanding, meaning going to your second location, maybe it's even your third, fourth, fifth, or 10th location. And then there are differences between businesses that are looking to reimagine or reposition what their future is. It might be what their next concept is, or how to take something and turn it into something else. Just a quick about me. I'm an architect and contractor. I've been a professor for over a decade, and I've led commercial development of climbing gyms around the country. I used to be a national level climber, and now I'm a dad and spend a lot more time, even though I was a climber, really sort of at my core, spend a lot of time surfing and skiing and speaking and working on what this next generation of facilities, these mixed use projects, these third place projects, what they can be. And so, depending on where you're at in this life cycle, if you're starting, a lot of times my role ends up being more of a fractional chief development officer, something that a larger company might have as a full time role. But for people starting, they don't necessarily have that. For businesses that are expanding, it often ends up being more of a brand architect role where it includes a lot of the fractional development work, but at the same time, it also really is focused on finding the next location, concepts and test fits, and checking out sites and figuring out how to take one project and use it as the stepping stone to the next one, and keeping the brand consistent. And so, always working with other architects locally. And if you're in the reimagine phase, then it really is often more of a specialist or consultant, because all I do is work on these third place projects, these activity based projects. And so, because of that, I'm well aware of where we're going, have thoughts on what we can be doing, and how to sort of bring those ideas into your business in the best way possible. And so, one of the key differentiators, though, that I see between these stages is how we make decisions. And it comes down to the fact that businesses are in different phases of life: starting, expanding, reimagining. These are all very different moments of a business's life that really lead to different priorities. It might just be starting the first one. That's the priority. It might be not making a mistake for the second one, or making sure that the second and third one are as good as the first one. And as you grow, it becomes that the certainties are different. You become certain of different things, like who our customer is, who our user is, how we make money, how we don't want to make money. And as you grow and as your sort of life of the business evolves, the evolving goals evolve, they change with it. So as you move along, you get different investors, you bring in different people, your team grows often. And so things just change. And as you learn more, how sort of risky are you going to be? How risk on are you going to be versus how much do you step back? And how much is this sort of driving innovation that may have been really key at the start of the company, but are you able to hold on to that? And so the agenda for this is really talking about, number one, common themes; number two, key differences; three, using examples to talk about those things; and then number four, tactics for helping make these decisions. Because again, to me, it's how we make decisions that is the thing that evolves. So some of the common themes are that, number one, everybody I work with is trying to do something like this. They're trying to create third place projects that are combining activities and community in a genuine way around activities and events and things that we love: sports, work, whatever it is. And to me, there's a bit of this equation where, and I'm going to be going through this quickly because this is in other videos, but this is the common thing through all of my work, which is there's this vision and passion plus the activities and experiences that are behind that passion, that is then divided by the business model and profit and upfront investment. Because there has to be this grounding principle to make sure that we're actually creating a successfully executed third place. And the third place, by definition, really is just the home away from home. And it's changed a lot in the 2020s, even though it was a term that was invented in the 1980s. And today it's more important than ever, where there is a distinct issue with both mental and physical health. People are really feeling a lack of connection, a lack of community, a lack of balance between life and work, and increased mental and physical health issues. And this is really combated by connection and innovation and inclusion and belonging, like both as an individual to have things to focus on and then collectively being part of a community. This is what has always been a way to foster physical and mental health in a positive way. And we do that through play and interaction with each other and engagement. Really loving the things we're doing gives us meaning in our lives. And so many times that happens in a third place. And so the third place plus is really what is the new version of that, the version for today, because things have changed so much. Work has changed. Our social life has changed. People are on the internet. It's a digital connection where this physical connection is still so valuable. So what is the plus? What is the next version of it? And to me, it's this combination of blue sky thinking and very, very practical digging ditches with clients. How can we make it work? What's the budget? How do we do as much as we can within the budget? It's not about having a bigger budget necessarily, but what can we do with the budget that's right for you? And because of that, to me, especially today, the reality is that we are in an economy that is very tricky. There are tariffs and then there aren't tariffs. There's uncertainty just all around. And that is what most economists are pointing to as the real problem, is not just the cost of things, but the uncertainty of it. And so within the life cycle of a project where you're moving from the ideas of like, why are we doing this, to beginning a project, finding space, signing LOIs and leases, visualizations, and all the steps of documenting and building, along the way, there's these major milestones of spending really sort of at the top in those diamonds. And to me, it can be broken down into the fact that if you're starting a business, you probably need help with all of that. If you're in the expanding mode, you may be past the point where you're wondering why we need to be doing this, and you're sort of already doing the project. You've already begun because you have a business. If you're reimagining, it might be an even further a degree of focus on just the visualization and concepts and how they fit within that. My point is that the decision making at each of these stages, and depending on where you're at, can be very different. And if you extend that timeline into more of an 18-month view, if we look at the initial part that I look at as more of an advising or a conversation, that really is just the beginning of projects, and really getting into sort of concepts and test fits and development of the project is this sort of middle that leads into the fourth phase of execution and sort of managing projects. But my point is that so much is happening at the very beginning that is really based on decision making that is critical for setting the steps for months and months beyond that. And I always say it's really about getting to the core issues, the first principles of a project, and balancing that with the money coming in to invest in the project versus the money that you're getting on the backside, whether you're for profit or nonprofit, because we want to have a good business that is sustainable in every way. And so this kind of balancing is due, and we do it with understanding our budgets and understanding the ingredients that are going into the project and understanding how they all relate to each other, but then also, and how the input, cash and investment of time and real estate and whatever else, what is the output? How do we understand that? How do we compare that to other things? And very importantly, how do we balance the three legs of the stool, which is operations, meaning how you run it, the programming, meaning what's your menu, what do you offer, and the environment, meaning the space itself that we're creating. All three of these things have to sing the same song, or you're just not going to get as far as you should, and your success is going to be more difficult to attain. Because if you just have a great menu and a terrible environment, it is going to be far less desirable for people to come back. If you have a great menu, but you run it like a bunch of jerks, are people really going to want to be like dedicated to your community? And there's examples of all of this, but the people who do it well, I think, notice how it's not about spending more. It's just about doing this well. And to me, the thing that ties it all together is narrative, using story to create better buildings. And when we use narrative that way, it becomes the baseline, the story that everything else can filter into, so that when we have to make decisions about where we allocate our money, what color something is, how we design a bathroom, or whatever it is it tall? Is it short? Is it big? Is it small? Is it one color or another color? It doesn't really matter if we don't have something to filter it through. And to me, that is narrative. That's discussion. And I've seen that be the case for both very small projects as well as for huge institutional projects where there's hundreds and thousands of people working on projects. Having a story that everybody can rally around makes it much more clear what we're all trying to do together. And when we're developing projects, the fact is that you're at the center. Everybody's looking to you, the architects, lawyers, realtors, engineers, contractors, whoever else. And you might have, there might be a team of you, but at the same time, there's a core circle, a core group that is everybody's looking to for direction and for answers. And if you're starting, that's why a lot of times my role is more as a fractional development officer, because it really comes down to me sitting side by side, shoulder to shoulder with you to help you answer all these questions, put the team together, not as your architect, not as your contractor, but as someone who is on your team to help you understand how the pieces all fit together, because it's playing the game that is the difficult part in developing a project. It's not the fact that we know we need different things, it's how they all fit together and when. That's why if you're starting, you may need help with all of this. You might need help just generally speaking. Why are we even doing the project? What is the scope of it? How big is it? How much do we want to spend? How much do we need to spend? How much do we want to spend? Getting into the rest of it, the visualization and the sort of looking into the future is a huge part of it. But we have to make sure we get the foundations right. And that's one of the big differences. And so some businesses that I've been working with recently on large projects, development projects, large building projects, business startups. This is an example of a fitness concept that is related to the kilter boards. And so a huge part of this process was discussing the business model relative to the layout of the space and how much we can fit in, and then how you do that. So design is an integral part, not only to creating the vibe of the building and the space itself, but also to make sure that the business model has the best chance for success. And other examples of projects that are done in concept as test fits to help take an idea, pull it together, and then be the concept and the core material that the rest of the team can build around. When a business is in an expanding mode, I might be more of a brand architect, where it's really about helping progress from one project to another, creating standards, creating things that we like, knowing things we don't like, and really knowing that, yes, we know why we're doing this. We know why we want to be, developing the next one, but now we need to do it. So finding spaces, test fits, looking at real estate, looking at LOIs and signing leases, and certainly visualization and understanding what we want to do next based on what we've already done, learning from the past while we are looking forward. And so that is a huge difference, is that, often the foundations are figured out. And so we're sort of able to look at what's next. And in that case, it's often working side by side in the core circle again, not as your architect, not as your contractor, but side by side with you and the rest of your team, which is probably growing at this point, so that we can continue to grow. And so some examples of that are groups like Summit City, where we worked on their first one and are working with them on developing different ones, developing climbing gyms over the years, looking at different spaces that could then be turned into what's next, looking for opportunities, or even working with companies, going from understanding prototypes to working with them as they've transitioned into more franchise models, and what that means so that it can be deployed in a different way than just one-off projects. Additionally, a group like this, where we actually worked, this is just one of many groups where we started with them as a new business, and now we're doing multiple locations. And so this is an example actually of one of many clients where we worked with them on the first one and are now working with them as they are sort of changing into that expansion mode, and things have changed. The investment has changed. The team has changed. The priorities evolve, and the way that we even look at the business is evolving. And so this is just one of several examples that I've even shown now where that's the case. And so it becomes a lot more about looking at real estate and doing test fits and executing projects and learning from the past projects to move forward to the next one. Same thing with different climbing companies I work with. And if you're in a reimagining phase, it's much more of a specialist role in some cases, because these are the only projects that I work on, are projects that are these third place projects that are based on creating really what is next in that world. And so it might be much more of a reimagining exercise. And if that's the case, it might be also working with a smaller team within a much larger team. And that could be a much, much larger team that is even, we're creating content that can be then used within the circle to then sort of, get support for changes of use or changes of buildings or things like that. And so this is an example of, changing the focus of different facilities to appeal to different skill levels. So taking away some things that were more progressive and allowing for things that are more accessible to different groups of people. And so visualizing that so that you can get support, so that you can introduce new concepts, so that you can do renovations to existing facilities and really just sort of get people on board with what's next for the company. And in terms of tactics for making decisions, identity to me is still a strategically critical item, because in maturing markets and when things are expensive, people expect things to actually be good. So just existing isn't enough, especially when there's direct competition. So what's your identity becomes a really important question, because you can't be great for everybody. So who is it that you're trying to take care of? And that again is a narrative question. You need to be able to explain that. And certainly there's data and demographics and numbers that back it up in terms of filling in the pieces of the story to make sure that you're actually making sense and you're not just making up something that's ridiculous. But you have to have a vision and you have to be able to articulate in a narrative way what that vision is. And this is why the two sort of good to great comments are this idea that disciplined people leads to disciplined thought, which leads to disciplined action. And that really is the process of defining the narrative, disciplined thought that we can then take disciplined action with. And the follow-up to that book, Great by Choice, is I think almost better, which is we're not imprisoned by circumstances. We're free to choose, free to be great by choice. My comment here is that notice how in this whole project or in this whole session, I haven't said that we need to spend more money to be great. What I'm saying is we need to choose to make the right decisions and be disciplined in that way so that whatever your budget is, we can do something that's truly great and choose to do that. Make the right decisions, whatever the budget is, and then decide to make that thing great. So if it's big, if it's small, I don't really care. What I care about though is us being inspired to make something truly great. And to me, a big part of that is defining the ecosystem. So just like in a true ecosystem, we're creating multi-generational venues for people of all different user types. People who have been doing these activities for years, for decades, people who've been doing these things for less than a year. It might be their first time. Professionals, people who drop their kids off. What do they do? Where do they go? Do they have a class? Do they get a coffee? Do they hate being there because you haven't given them anywhere to go? You haven't given them a place to sit that isn't just disgusting. How does this ecosystem that you're creating of the third place, how does it work? And that really is the question that, again, has to be the answer to the narrative question that you're asking. This is the answer of what is the right combination: kids, no kids, all kids, tall, short, big, small, expensive, not expensive, low budget, efficient, super fancy. These are all based on who you're trying to take care of. None of those are right or wrong answers necessarily. And the way that I look at the process of doing this, it's about clarifying vision, understanding the goals and mindset at the deepest level, creating a sort of shopping list, meaning what are the ingredients we're using, and then balancing budget, schedule, financial planning and analysis with the visuals. What does it look like? And that sort of hopper creates the environment that we're producing. The environment is the home for the activities, the things we have an affinity for. The activities are the things that, as we move around the circle, create the community. The community comes out of the fact that people want to be together to do these things, not the other way around. The economic result comes out of the fact that we have attracted a community through these activities, and goes back to the environment, meaning, is the environment the right setting for the things we want to do? Is it producing enough? Does it have the spaces we need to run the business we want to run? And as we loop around and around over and over, it changes as you actually evolve as a business. So for instance, in the first round, a lot of it might be much more about what can we hold on to? What do we need to hold on to? What versus what can we give up? Especially at the beginning when you're having to make hard decisions. So that often is when you're starting. Really, you're having to make a lot of decisions about what are we going to keep? What can we hold off on? Maybe we do it later. Maybe we do it in the next project. Maybe we do it in a phase 2. The second round is often about refinement or the next project. So what do we want to replace? What do we want to focus on? What can we do differently? The third round might be, what else can we do? What's next? So really looking to the future. And then we can keep doing that loop in the sort of season to taste model where it's about, we can keep adding more and more spice, or we can take smaller steps. And finally, one of the most important things is that the goals and the way that we judge success changes over time as well. Investment changes, your sort of risk tolerance changes. All these different factors in the life of the business start to affect the way that we judge success. So if we sort of create a series of pairs, service versus profit, how profit focused are you versus how service focused are you? When you're starting, it might be very different than when you're expanding or reimagining as you take on new investment. This all really has to change, and it's just a different way. It becomes different in terms of how you make decisions. Community versus self. How much are you doing this for yourself or for your own interests or for your own sort of enjoyment versus community? If you're, depending on the investors, they might be demanding that their own self-interest is protected sort of above all. This is where things like private equity get really, really difficult to deal with sometimes because their interest might sort of cripple the rest of it in a lot of cases. And there's many examples of that because of the way they do business. It also is an example of long versus short term. Do you have a long horizon? Are you a family business? Are you doing this for a generational business? Some of the most valuable businesses in the world are like that. Versus, are you in it for a more short-term result and something that you need to have an ROI on in 3 years or whatever it is? Like you have a plan for a 2-year turnaround or whatever it is. Versus, security or exploration. Like how much are you looking to explore? How much of this is trying to be progressive and unique and interesting versus playing it safe, being secure? If you're a public or a nonprofit, the sort of scatter map of this would be very different, almost opposite private equity group. If you're more of a family or generational business, it might be somewhere sort of in the middle. But regardless, the point is that the way that you make decisions does change and the way that we judge success does evolve over time. So the point really is that making decisions is very different when you're starting versus when you're expanding versus when you're in a state where you're established and reimagining. And it can be really tricky to know what the right decision is. And that's why things like a narrative of what it is we're really trying to do, having everybody agree on the story you're trying to tell and what the true goals are, meaning are we trying to innovate or are we trying to play it safe? It's really interesting how businesses, just the life of the business, it just naturally evolves and changes. So by understanding that, it allows us to try to get to the core issue that is the thing we can really look at to make a decision, regardless of which phase you're in, but understanding that the decision-making criteria is different at each of those life cycles of the business. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.